The Atlanta Braves have more outfielders than spots to play them in 2025, but don't worry, I'm going to tell you what they should do. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Thursday, October 10th. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. You can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack. And thank you to everybody who's here. We've had some really great response in the last couple episodes. And even when you haven't always agreed with me, it's been very respectful in the comments, especially on YouTube. I appreciate that a ton. If you have feedback for us, the best way to get it to us, if you're on YouTube, leave a comment down below. Again, if you're on Twitter, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show, Braves_today on Twitter, and you can even email us, contact@bravestoday.com. That comes directly to me. I want to hear from you on as we're constructing this offseason. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to know about? What questions do you have? Or where do you think I got it wrong? And I guarantee you I'm going to get a lot of that kind of reaction on this show because we talked about this briefly last Friday. One of the three things I wanted to touch on in the most important things to figure out in the offseason show that we did, your outfield. The Atlanta Braves are going to have too many mouths to feed in 2025. The way things currently stand, okay, Marcell Ozuna is having his option picked up by the team. They will actually save some money here, right? He made $18 million this year. His club options for $16 million. It's not really relevant to what you do in the outfield because Marcell Ozuna is not going to play outfield for the Atlanta Braves. His final start in the outfield is going to end up having been April 2nd, 2023. He was the opening day starter at Washington. He had one more start the end of that series. He has not played the outfield for Atlanta since. He's not going to. When you go to games, when I'm there in the press box watching pregame warmups, he is working behind Matt Olson at first base. I don't think he's even touched the grass yet. So he is not going to be an outfielder for this team. But even outside of that, you still have multiple outfielders under contract for next year. Ronald Acuna Jr. is expected back early in the year. We don't know the exact date. Alex Anthopoulos scared a couple people with his comments at the presser last Friday. He talked about it could be opening day. It could be late April. It could be May. It could even be June. The point he was trying to make, and he explained it better in the clips that didn't get circulated on social media, is they don't have a lot of information because there's a lot of time between now and opening day. So they don't know how these players will respond over the offseason to their workouts, to their treatments, to their rehabs. And when they get into spring training and he gets his physical from the team, they'll have a lot better idea and a more realistic timeline, a narrower timeline of when he could come back. But it's safe to assume sometime soon after opening day, Ronald Acuna Jr. could be back in your lineup. His knee injury this time was earlier in the season than when he had it in 2021. So he's had more time to rehab it and more knowledge about what he needs to do to rehab this properly to return to the player that he is capable of being. Ronald Acuna Jr., I feel comfortable saying, barring some sort of weird setback, will be back earlier in the year. Michael Harris obviously is going to be full go in the spring. He will be here. And then you've got multiple options available for left field. When you traded for Jorge Soler, he had 2 years and $32 million left on his contract. So $16 million next year, $16 million the year after that. You also have Jared Kelenic, who is arbitration eligible as a Super 2 player for the first time this offseason. I believe MLB Trade Rumors projects him to make around $2.3 million. You will have 3 additional years of team control after that. And then the wild card here is Ramón Laureano. He is in his final year before free agency. He is remarkably close. He missed it by just a few days of being, I believe, of being a free agent, but he is expected to make $6.1 million in arbitration. That's MLB Trade Rumors projection as of now. You have a lot of options in your outfield in 2025. And the big questions here, how many of these guys do you either bring back or move? Do you bring back Laureano? Do you trade either Soler or Ozuna? And how do you configure everything? And I teased at the open. Here's what I think Atlanta is going to do. One of the big requests of the fan base, I put out a poll on Twitter. I like to do these polls just to find out what Braves fans are thinking. One of the big requests of the fan base is to trade either Jorge Soler or Marcell Ozuna. And I'm hesitant to think the team is going to do either one of those things. I remember driving to the winter meetings last year and recording a brief pod. It's somewhere on this feed. It's on the YouTube feed. It's not on the audio feed. Recording a brief pod from the car talking about Alex Anthopoulos discussing with us, the media, about the fact that Atlanta does not give these guys who sign extensions with the team, they do not give them no trade clauses. Now, some of these players will get a no trade clause on their own. 10 and 5 rights. If you have 10 years in the league, 5 with the same team, you will automatically, per the CBA, get a no trade clause. That is just something that comes along. But Atlanta does not include no trade clauses with their guys. And in return, Atlanta tells them that we will not trade somebody on a long-term deal. The fact that Marcell Ozuna is on a club option, on a deal he signed in free agency, versus an extension after being acquired by the team, I don't think is going to change that position from Alex Anthopoulos. He was very insistent, very clear on that in that press conference, that Atlanta is not going to trade somebody who has been willing to sign long-term with the organization. And again, he was referring to extensions. Okay, and it was because there was some sort of speculation that somebody, I can't remember who it was, if it was Ozzy Albies or somebody who was signed long-term was going to get moved last offseason. I can't think of who it was. But Anthopoulos was very insistent that is not a thing that the team is going to do. And based on what Marcell Ozuna did this year, the fact that he is considered a leader in the clubhouse, there are so many stories of players who have been struggling and they got a friendly word and a pep talk from Marcell Ozuna, or the relationship a lot of the Latin American players have with him where he's seen as the leader of that group. So many stories like that. I am inclined to believe that they are not going to trade Marcell Ozuna. They're going to let him, they've already indicated they're going to pick up that option. They have not technically picked up the options for Darno and Ozuna and Aaron Bummer. It was reported by everybody after last Friday's press conference. Atlanta had picked those up. Anthopoulos did clarify the actual notifying the league that the Braves are picking up those options waits until right before the deadline, which is 5 days after the World Series, because you never know what's going to happen. And he worded it like that, like God forbid something were to happen. And I interpreted that to mean as one of these guys gets hit by a bus or something, right? So they have not actually done it, but they've said they're going to. There's no reason to think they're lying on that. And the other thing I think you have to discuss with Marcell Ozuna is Braves fans have forgiven Marcell Ozuna for some of his off-the-field transgressions, right? He served his suspension. He rejoined the team. Since he came back to the team, whether it was after the domestic violence accusations, which I believe those charges were dismissed, or the DUI, he has been a model citizen with the team. He has been, that we know of, in no legal trouble. Braves fans have moved on from that. There are other fan bases and presumably other teams that have not. And for a lot of reasons, all of those reasons, I don't think the Braves are going to trade Marcell Ozuna. At the same time, I don't know if Atlanta is going to trade Jorge Soler. And there's a few reasons for that. The first one is trading Jorge Soler right now is selling when he is not at the peak of his value. He played 49 games in Atlanta. He batted .243 with an .849 OPS. He walked 24 times to 44 strikeouts. He had 9 home runs. He did not look good defensively in right field, despite not having enough innings to qualify on StatCast. He came in at -7 outs above average, which is the worst mark on the team from anybody last year. Jared Kelenic was higher than that. Guys who were here the whole season, right? That was the worst mark on the team, was Jorge Soler's -7. And he did that in significantly less innings than anybody else played. So, for a few different reasons, if you trade him, you are trading him at the lowest point in his value. He played 326 defensive innings for Atlanta and graded out at a -7. The other reason is some comments that Alex made to us at the trade deadline in the press conference he did with the media right after he acquired Jorge Soler. I pulled the clip. I actually have a clip of this one. I pulled the clip. I'm going to play it for you real quick so you can hear exactly how hard the team has tried to get Jorge Soler back since 2021.
Look, candidly, we thought we were very close to getting him at the trade deadline in 2022. Ultimately, we did the Iglesias deal. We discussed him in the 22 offseason with Miami again, going into 23. So in that offseason, we had discussions again about him. We did not discuss him this offseason as a free agent. We just, with where we were set up and our needs and so on, and the year offensively we were coming off of, that wasn't an area. But we, when he was under contract with the Marlins, we had talks, the deadline in 22 and the offseason going into 23.
So after the 2021 World Series run with Jorge Soler, where he was amazing, he signed with the Marlins. Atlanta tried multiple times to acquire Jorge Soler. Now, coming off of 2023, given obviously what the offense did, you were bringing just about everybody back. They did not try to get him then. But outside of that, the trade deadline in 22, the offseason between 22 and 23, Atlanta tried multiple times to acquire Jorge Soler. Based on that, using the information that we have, because that's all we can do, we know that his value is not as high as it could be because of the offensive struggles and the defensive struggles. And we know that Atlanta tried multiple times to acquire him before finally being successful at the trade deadline. It feels increasingly unlikely like the team is going to trade Jorge Soler somewhere else. So we have to operate as of now, as of Marcell Ozuna is not being traded, is coming back and being the DH again next year, and Jorge Soler is in your outfield mix. In just a minute, let's talk about, do they pick up Ramón Laureano, and how do you play these guys? We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. I'm Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. You can find all of the written work, bravestoday.com. And we're talking about the Braves outfield and the logjam you have for playtime and everything. And I'm operating on the assumption you're not trading Jorge Soler, you're not trading Marcell Ozuna, because everything the team has said points to they want both of those guys. They've been trying to have those guys on the same team for a while. Now you're in a situation of, how do you configure this team? Configure this outfield, because Marcell Ozuna is a DH. He is not playing the outfield for Atlanta. I am of the position that Jared Kelenic has a role on this roster, but I do not know if he makes the roster early next year. Okay. I'm going to read you the quote from the press conference on Friday, the end of season press conference. This is Alex Anthopoulos talking about Jared Kelenic. He discussed the fact that Kelenic lost his job to Laureano, gave credit to Laureano, and expressed confidence that Jared Kelenic had a role with this team. Quote, Jared's a young player, left-handed bat. We saw great defense out of him. Come in camp, compete. We'll see where the winner goes. But the one thing we've needed the last 2 years, we've needed a backup center fielder. He fits the roster in so many ways because he can play all 3 outfield positions. He can really throw. He's been a good defender for us. He's got some power. He's committed to getting better. So glad to have him. You're going to need someone like that. And he's a left-handed bat. So I believe, based on all of the comments that we have, based on all of the work they did to acquire Jared Kelenic last offseason, Jared Kelenic's career in Atlanta is not done. I don't see any of these 3 players getting traded. I don't see Soler getting traded. I don't see Ozuna getting traded. I don't see Jared Kelenic getting traded. I do, however, see the potential to put Jared Kelenic in AAA next season to start the year, especially if you bring back Ramón Laureano, because Ramón Laureano is a guy that played well for Atlanta this year. He hit .296 with an .832 OPS in 67 games, stole 5 bags, hit 10 home runs. You can retain him for just about $6 million, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of money to the Atlanta Braves, especially with payrolls reported to go up, as Anthopoulos said at that same press conference on Friday. So what I believe you are going to do is you are going to retain Ramón Laureano. Jared Kelenic will have the ability to battle for a job, but likely will start the year in AAA playing every single day. Laureano and Soler will be a rotation in left field, depending on how frequently Ronald Acuna Jr. can play the field after, like, in his return. I'll remind you, when he came back in 2022, he made 27 starts at DH. So he was, especially like later in the year, he had a stretch where I want to say it was, what is this? It was 12 straight games where he was your DH because his knee was at the point where he could not play left, he could not play right field. So I am convinced that you can go into the season, say, with Kelenic, Soler, Laureano as your 3 corner outfielders while you wait to activate Ronald Acuna Jr. till he's ready. When he's ready, you may see Jared Kelenic go down to AAA, where he can play every day. And your outfield would be Soler, Laureano, Acuna, and Harris. Harris plays every day, obviously. The goal would be to let Acuna play almost every day in right. When he needs days off, you can do Soler in one corner, Laureano in the other. This all hinges, and I hear people saying this now, this all hinges on Jorge Soler getting better defensively. It is entirely likely that part of the reason Jorge Soler was so bad defensively was he had not played any innings in the outfield this year until the trade. And then shortly after the trade, he suffered a hamstring injury and he came back from it. We know how these things can linger. He arguably was not 100%. I would argue at all since he got to Atlanta. Shortly after the trade, the hamstring injury, I don't think he was 100% at any point in time this season. If he spends the offseason working on his defense, getting healthy, maybe improving the speed a little bit, if that's a question, if that's possible, the goal would be for him to just not be awful in the outfield. There is recent history of that happening in 2022. He's never been a positive defender by run value in the outfield ever in his career. But in 2022, he played 469 innings in left field for the Marlins at a -2 outs above average and a 0 run value. So his arm is at least average, if not above average. For left field, it's perfectly fine. A world does exist where Jorge Soler can be an everyday starter in left field for one more year until Marcell Ozuna, his option is done, and he walks in free agency. And at that point, hopefully, Jared Kelenic would be ready to be your everyday left fielder, and you would have Kelenic, Harris, Acuna as your left to right in the outfield with Soler as your DH. It's going to kind of hinge on what does Jorge Soler do over the offseason to be ready to play 130 games in the outfield, maybe. The other main reason why I don't expect Atlanta to make any trades and probably to pick up the Ramón Laureano arbitration instead of non-tendering him is injuries happen. Alex Anthopoulos told us every single season since 2021, like I think since he's been here, but I went back to 21, they've had to acquire outfielders or somehow find another outfielder because of injuries. Every single year, you've lost somebody. Obviously, 2021, we know what happened there, right? We know Ronald went down. We know you traded for 4 guys. I don't have to rehash that. In 2022, Ronald Acuna Jr. missed 21 games before being activated. Wasn't 100% like on the IL. Missed some games when he came back. Wasn't 100%. Eddie Rosario missed 70 games. He had that eye issue and eye surgery and was not the same when he came back. Adam Duvall missed 74 games with a wrist injury. He had surgery on a tendon sheath in his wrist. So he missed 74 games. Because of that injury, or those injuries, plural, Atlanta played 8 different players in left field that year, 3 players in center. Now, granted, Michael Harris came up, and when Michael Harris came up, he was almost the sole starter in center field. After he came up, there was a grand total of, I think it was 2 starts from somebody else, and that was Guillermo Heredia. He played the last game of the year, and he started a random game in early August. Outside of that, Harris was the sole starter. But you also played 6 different players in right field. They traded for Robbie Grossman at the deadline. They had to go out and get a guy for the outfield. In 2023, you look at some of the injuries here. Sam Hilliard missed 75 games. Michael Harris missed 21 games. Because of all of that, in 2020, you had to go and you had to find more outfielders. This is a situation, 5 different players played in left. Most of that was Rosario and Pilar. Hilliard had played some. Ozuna, again, had 2 games out there. Forrest Wall was called up late in the year, had to make a start out there. You played 5 different players in center. You played Eli White, you played Pilar, you played Hilliard, you played Wall, and then Harris. And Pilar made 5 starts in right field for Ronald as well. You had to, in this case, you had to call up Forrest Wall to give you a little bit of extra depth and some pinch running in the month of September. But you had to go out and call up another guy. Probably the healthiest season you've had from the outfield, and you still lost one of your key backups in Hilliard for the rest of the year. This year, obviously, we know about the injuries. You played 8 different players in left. You played 4 different players in center. You played 6 different players in right. The constant with this team, and really with any team in baseball, but the constant that we've seen, an outfielder is going to get hurt. You're going to collide with the wall, like what happened with Michael Harris in 23. That's why he missed that time. His back hit the wall on a catch. Somebody's going to get hurt. And I am a firm believer depth will always work itself out. Okay? You will have a place for everybody to play eventually. And I would rather have an extra guy on the bench to start the season than to trade somebody away or not pick up a Laureano option and have a perfect outfield plan and then it get ruined a couple weeks into the season when, let's say, somebody gets their wrist rolled up making a diving catch. Somebody collides with the wall awkwardly. Somebody strains a hamstring. And all of a sudden now, you are faced with, we are an outfielder short of where we need to be to have a well-rounded roster. I'm paraphrasing. I don't have the exact quote, but I believe Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. We saw this year, Atlanta got punched in the mouth a couple times. and they had to scramble to figure out what to do. The Alex Anthopoulos, something else I found interesting in that Friday press conference was he was talking about the 2021 season where Atlanta dealt with injuries behind the plate. And they ended up starting 7 different catchers in 2021. Travis d'Arnaud played 53 games. William Contreras started 47. But Stephen Vogt had 22 games. Alex Jackson had 7. Jonathan Lucroy started 2 games. They went through 7 different catchers. And he was talking about Drake Baldwin having a role on the team, going back to AAA next year potentially. And he said, you can never have too much depth behind the plate. I learned that lesson in 2021. I don't want that to happen again. And that stood out to me because I feel like that's combining that with his comments at the trade deadline about always having to go find an outfielder. I feel, and then just in general, how your depth was tested this year, right? You had a utility infielder at the major league level in Luis Guillorme to start the year. You had a utility infielder in AAA and David Fletcher to start the year, and you still had to go out. You grabbed Zach Short off of waivers. You played him. You grabbed Gio Urshela. He became an everyday starter. You grabbed Whit Merrifield when he was DFA. You kept having to go find other infielders because you didn't have enough depth. This is that situation again. I feel just based on the public comments that Alex Anthopoulos has made, he is going to lean on the side of, I would rather have too many outfielders than too few, because somebody somewhere will get hurt and we will have the depth to replace them without needing to make a move. It is easier to get a depth player in the offseason than it is in season. It is so much harder to replace a player in the year, especially when you're nowhere near the trade deadline and teams aren't really making a lot of guys available. So keep in mind as you go into the offseason and as we get towards spring training, it's going to look like Atlanta has too many outfielders. That's probably on purpose. Arguably, you're going to have too many catchers. They're picking up the Travis d'Arnaud option. You've got Chadwick Tromp and Drake Baldwin in AAA. And by the way, Baldwin's tearing it up in the Arizona Fall League. We'll recap that probably on Monday in that catcher show, but he's hitting really well in the Arizona Fall League. He looks like he could be a major league guy, but they're going to keep one more guy than they think they need. They even signed Sandy Leon in AAA, and for a while, they had 3 potential MLB caliber catchers in AAA because they would rather have one too many guys than one too few. And I feel like that's what's going to happen in the outfield as well. Again, I know we want them to trade Soler or Ozuna, or I've seen people ask to trade Kelenic. I don't think, based on Anthopoulos' public comments, he's going to trade Marcell Ozuna, who's a leader in the clubhouse, and Jorge Soler and Jared Kelenic. You're arguably selling them at their lowest in their value versus their highest. And with Soler's contract, $32 million guaranteed the next 2 seasons, you probably have to include an asset to get rid of him. So I don't expect these players to get moved. If you feel otherwise, please let me know. Again, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Show's on Twitter at Braves_today. You can email us, contact@bravestoday.com. Either way, go tell your friends. There's a great podcast they can go listen to that talks all about the Atlanta Braves and breaks things down in a way that I feel is pretty helpful and informative. Again, we're back tomorrow. I want to have the shortstop show. Christian should be back. He's been dealing with a case, I believe it's a strep throat. We'll talk about how to replace Orlando Arcia if you can, and how to make him a better hitter at the plate if you can. And until then, this has been Braves Today.